Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and this week, Mike Connor and Mike Simmons are going to talk about account planning. But before we get into that, let me say that we did kind of a test with the call planning episode where Mike and Mike created a document that after you heard the episode, you could download this document and have it with you to help plan calls. Well, that led to the idea based on people that had downloaded the document. They were interested in account planning. So Mike and Mike have now created a strategic account plan document. So this episode is going to be about account planning. And then at the end of the show, after you've heard what they've had to say, you can go and download your own strategic account plan document. So hello, Mike and Mike, let's talk account planning.
Hey, Jody. Yeah, I think this is great. And as I thought about that intro, I wonder if we got the cart before the horse. We solved an immediate problem with somebody that was talking about the importance of planning calls, planning meetings. So we put that together. And then not only did we get that in the form of a question, do you have an asset like that? I've actually been living that for the last 2 weeks, I guess, with a new client that we're working with where the absence of a strategic account planning document, I'm living the pain firsthand. And we're working on putting that and integrating it into CRM to provide insights into how we're approaching our account base from a strategic perspective. So great timing because we're living it just like anybody else that's trying to figure out what strategy they want to put in place to go after an identified prospect. So great timing.
And if you think about it, I mean, it just kind of makes sense. You've got the call plan, which is that interaction with the customer. And then as you back up a little bit further, you want to have the account plan. And then as you back up even further and take that higher level overview, then you start to get into territory planning. So maybe we'll make this just part of a series where we've got the call plan, the account plan, and then, in general, the territory plan. So getting with account planning, one thing that comes to mind for me is a roadmap. This is everything I know about what's happening inside an organization that I'm working with. And when I've described this before to people, I think of any interaction or any conversation or anything that I read about an organization as just another brush stroke on a painting, where I don't know if that brush stroke is part of a painting that's an 8x10 or it's a 20 by 36, or if it's a mural on a wall. But I know that each time I get engaged with the customer, I'm adding another piece of paint to that overall picture. With an account plan, what I want to know are those common things. Who are we working with? Why is this thing important to them? What's important to them? Where do they fit in the organization? What are their goals relative to this thing that we're implementing? What are our goals as far as the organization? What does success look like? So I'm sure as we kind of get in deeper into the discussion, we'll hit on each of those things and talk about timing. But account planning is something that I think all of us as sales reps could do a better job with.
Well, it's the thing that I think a lot of times if we're busy, and this is the scenario that we're sort of in the middle of right now, which is there's early on with this company, there's been enough inbound activity and demand for the product that's kept the sales team really, really busy. And now they've kind of worked through that wave. And now it's like, okay, we've got to figure out how are we going to go after the rest of this addressable market. And it happens to be in an industry where the number of people out there that you would potentially prospect, it's a finite audience. So we're not talking about millions of people we're going after. We're talking in the hundreds. And the idea there is that you have the advantage of not having to cut through a lot of noise to figure out who you're going to connect with. But you have to figure out how am I going to go after each one of these potential clients, knowing that there's a finite number to really go after. And everyone that I do incorrectly or improperly that leads to either lack of engagement or a no means that's one less that I can potentially convert into a customer. So you really have to be careful when you have a finite audience. But the reason that we got into this discussion hands-on is because the existing call planning document really wasn't a strategy document. the document that was in place was more about a deal tracker document, which was really important when you had a lot of inbound activity where you were just saying, okay, here are the people that reached out to us. Here are the stakeholders that we've already met. It was really client driven. And so one of the things that we learned early on in this project is that the account plan was essentially a summary of what had happened versus a forward looking view of what needs to happen. And one of the things Mike just said is understanding these brush strokes. I think the other thing before you start working with a client, this is where you invest your time doing the research. It's never been easier to find relevant data and information about anybody that you're going to want to potentially engage with. And I'm not just talking about stalking people on LinkedIn, but doing meaningful research on the company level, the leadership, everybody that would be involved in a potential engagement. That information is so much easier to find than it was even 10 years ago. And so the idea is do that homework and organize it in a way. And I think what you end up with in your initial call plan, and I think you'll see this in the template that we build, is that there are a lot of things that you know, and there's a lot of things that you don't know. And what you need to focus on is what are the things that I don't know that I need to know? And what that starts to do is organize that thought process of here's how I want to engage with this company or this institution. Here are the initial contacts that I want to try and engage with. Here's why. And here are the things that I really want to try and uncover through those discussions. So it's much more, I think the initial feedback we've received so far is this is a really methodical approach. The objective before we introduced this strategic planning process was more like, let's see if we can get somebody to look at a demo. And the problem with that scenario is that if all you're trying to do is get people to look at your product, you'll find that the discussions after that are just about your product. It's very hard to go back and say, hey, I'm trying to learn a little bit about how we can help you and what your role is, what your challenges are, and how we can deliver value. Once you get into that mode of assessing the product, either you're going to get feedback that says, this is what I like, or hey, that's really cool, or no, that's not what we're looking for, and let's move on. And you've kind of played your card at that point. And so there's a lot of very intentional heavy lifting that you want to do before you just jump into product demos, so that if for nothing else, that when you do go into the product, you're talking about it from solving a problem perspective that the customer can relate to versus let me show you some cool things that I think you'll really like.
Yeah, we tend to you start with a blank slate. I mean, you've got a couple of questions. It's who do I know? What do I know? What don't I know? Does the person I know, or do the people I know or have contact with, can they help me answer those questions? If not, who inside the organization can help answer those questions? And how can those people help me connect? Or how can the people I know today help me connect with those who I need to know in order to get to the information that I need to know? When I think of it as this giant puzzle where we've got these individual pieces that we can start putting together and putting into this process without actually saying, I need to fit an organization into a specific box. These are not questions that lead me to a specific outcome. They lead me in a direction, but not based on some preconceived notion of, hey, if I can get the customer to check this, 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 and this, then I know I've got a deal here. It's, as we've talked about multiple times, this is a thinking process. So we'll share the document that we use that we've put together from a catalyst sale perspective, but it gets into that, the who, the what, the why, the where, the when, the how. And then also, what's the time frame that we're looking at in order to accomplish these things? So what are the things I need to do in this next 30 days? How about the next 60 days? What about the next 90 days? How about the things that I've accomplished in the last 90 days? So I start to get an understanding of what's happened in the past, as well as what I'm doing here in the short term. And the reason that that's important, and I think as an individual rep, you sometimes miss this. It's important to have that document so that when you bring other people to the table inside your organization, you start leaning on others inside your organization to help you with this process or these discussions, that they can get read up on what's happened so far. So you've got the recap information and you've got some examples of where you want things to go. And it just makes it so much easier to collaborate with others inside the organization. If you've got a standard document that people understand, that they know how to read and they know what to expect.
So one of the things to keep in mind too is that I think a lot of people have the perception that when you start talking about doing major account plans, it's a lot of work. You can only afford to do that if you're a big game hunter. Hey, I'm a SDR, so I've got to try and do outreach to 70 people a day or whatever the case might be. And the perception is that it just takes too much time to do a lot of this stuff. And there's certainly a time and a place for account management. I think the context that we're kind of discussing today probably lends itself towards larger opportunities with extended sales cycles. But a few thoughts that popped onto my head is one is the account plan document in itself is a living, breathing thing. It's a starting point, but it does evolve. And as we build out all of the tools that we use here at Catalyst, what you'll see is, Mike mentioned, there's a territory plan. Then the subset of that is the account plan. The subset of that is a series of call plans. And those call plans start to tell the story. I think one of the things that was at least a red flag for me with the project I'm working on is that the account strategy document was being used to record what had happened in meetings. And so the first red flag I would hear is, hey, I had a great call with this particular institution today. I got to go back and make sure I update the strategy document so that everybody knows what's going on. And really the order is flipped there because the outcome of the call, it wasn't strategic at all and it wasn't intentional. It was more of the note keeping that you would do post meeting to make sure that you captured all of the new information that you'd sort of gathered in the call. And there's another place for that as well. One thing I wanted to highlight is that if the perception is that this all has to be built in your CRM and it has to be an automated workflow, it really doesn't. And we've lived in both worlds where we've fully baked it into Salesforce, for example, and it created workflows and radio buttons and steps and fields and all that stuff that salespeople had to complete and data fields. And then we've done the simple implementations where CRM has the customer information, but then it links out to Google Documents, for example. So you can have your strategic account document. You can keep that in a shared drive, and then you just create the link inside of CRM so that if somebody does want to see what the plan looks like or what the recent call plans look like, you can just link out into those documents. So there's a way to do this without feeling like, wow, we've got to do all of this custom workflow information inside of our CRM. And a lot of it's just dictated based on where you are as a company and what tools you have available. We tend to work with a lot of early stage companies that they don't have an army of 10,000 salespeople and a Salesforce administrator and a bunch of people that can make these things happen. So I think what you'll see is that what we share with you will be very suitable for smaller organizations that don't have all of those resources.
When I think back to working for one company I did where we would have a lot of account managers for various products reach out to us, it became clear pretty quickly into the conversation that they didn't know very much about us. And hearing you guys talk about account planning overall and your strategic account plan document in particular, it makes me realize this can help you avoid making those awkward calls where you don't know much about the person or the company you're calling, and you just hope they don't realize. That's what I felt, that they would just hope I didn't realize they didn't know very much about the company.
Yeah. We've all been a part of those conversations where someone asks you the same question that you know that you answered or that your business partner answered. Or I know that Mike answered 2 weeks ago in a similar conversation, and now we're just repeating ourselves. And you've been involved in those scenarios where you're having that conversation and you know it's something you should already know, but you haven't been able to find the information because you went through and the notes from the rep who was working on the deal before, it said, had meeting, discussed next steps. And that was the extent of what was put in there. So yeah, we've been there. And a document like this, and Mike mentioned Google Docs. We use that because it's a really neat way to be able to collaborate with others. It's easy for people to either, whether you want to open it up for them to edit or you just want them to be able to provide comments or just view it, becomes a great way to share information both inside and outside of the organization. But the thing that's important to us is that you have a process, that you have a place where you're documenting this thing, whatever that thing is, that helps you'll be able to describe what's the context of the business relationship, where is that, where do you want to take that business relationship? So in our plan, we start with why. Why is the organization doing this? Why might it make sense for that company to do business with us? And then go from there.
So if account planning is new to somebody, whether they're new into sales or they're in a company, an organization that hasn't done much account planning, if this is new to us, what would you say about account planning just to either help us get in the right mindset or help us get started in proper account planning?
Well, the thing that you need to keep in mind is you keep the end in mind, right? What is the ultimate goal here? And what is the gap between where we're sitting today versus what is it going to take to have that prospect become somebody that does business with you? And if you have history and you know who typically buys your product, if you know who typically sees value in what you do from different perspectives inside of an organization, if you have a good understanding of what problems you solve for companies, and the same product can solve different problems, but if you understand those perspectives, at least you have a starting point to have those conversations. And then what you do is just measure, what is the gap here? What do we know and what we don't know? And I think that's the first step that I find the most value in with a strategic account plan is just tell me everything you know. And then I start asking the questions. All right, well, what is it? If we wanted to move forward from, we don't know anything about these guys and they don't know anything about us, what's the first thing we want to achieve? And in our case, in our process, we want to just validate that we're in the right ballpark, right? We want to know that this is a company that should find what we do interesting, that they probably have challenges that we can address. And then from that, after you've looked at the short list of all the things you know, and that's the publicly available information, I think you highlighted something, Jody, earlier, that there just is no excuse for anymore, which is going blind into a call, not knowing anything is the fastest way to never get another call with that client. And in reality, years ago, that was just all you had. You'd go to Hoover's and you'd get basic contact information, their role, maybe financial information, but there wasn't a lot of publicly available facing stuff that you could leverage and learn. And today, that exists with so many avenues inside of a company. Sure, you'll find people that aren't active on Twitter or on LinkedIn or in different social outlets. Maybe they're not highlighted and they don't publish things, but in more cases than not, you can find people inside of any organization that do have those roles. And the idea is learn from what they're putting out there and have that in your back pocket before you have that call, which used to be 15 years ago, you'd call somebody and say, like, I really don't know a lot about what your role. Tell me about your role and what you do, and tell me about the company. And you just, in most cases, you don't need to do that anymore. You can do the homework. And that's the starting point. Know what you know, but also realize there's a lot you don't know. And then how do you prioritize filling in the blanks of the information that you don't have yet, and who can deliver that for you?
And I think that's a really key point that Mike just hit on at the end there, which is that prioritization. You've only got a certain amount of time that you're going to be able to interact with any one individual. And when we talk about the individual call plan, that's what that's for. But this account plan is more about who are some of the other people inside the organization that I should be talking to, that I can be leaning on for resources, who are really interested in sharing. It amazes me today that there are conversations that we'll have with people where they'll say, well, tell us a little bit about your business. And Mike just hit on that. And it makes me wonder, do we not describe on our website what our business does? Maybe we need to clean up the language that's out on our website. It might not be clear to people what we are and who we are as an organization. And that just, to me, that question as a sales rep is okay if you're trying to validate an understanding of what you know about their business, but not if you're just asking the customer to educate you on who they are and what they do.
Yeah, and before you, there's a lazy way to do that too, that becomes even worse. And I'll use this as an example. There's certain things that you can use that will give you feeds, news feeds about a company. And I used to have this happen to me at a larger company that I worked at. And the sales rep, I knew that they had those feeds. They were getting the alerts. I knew what news we were putting on the wire. I knew what was out in the market. And it would amaze me that they would use content that they would find in a news feed as a way to reconnect with me, as if what was being put out in the news had anything to do with the problems I was trying to solve for that organization. In other words, they should have known what I did for that company and what was important to me, and not share a news release that had absolutely nothing to do with me, but just because it was part of my company, they thought it would be a great way to say, hey, I'm really paying attention to what you're doing. All that told me was that they had an automated news feed and they were just trying to use that as a way to personalize their email. And there's a big difference between personalization that is addressed to the recipient and using efficiency tools that will generate stuff that should get you close but doesn't really hit home. And I just remember receiving a lot of outreach like that, where if they knew even if they had a remote idea of what I did, just based on my title and functionally what I should be doing in a company, they probably wouldn't have sent that email.
Well, this has been a great look at account planning. Tell us where we can get the strategic account plan document.
So we'll include a link in the show notes of this podcast. We'll also have a link on the Catalyst Sale website, which is catalystsale.com. And we'll promote it through our Twitter feed and through LinkedIn. So you should be able to find it. If you can't find it, you can hit us up at hello@catalystsale.com and we'll follow up to that as well.
Yeah, we're happy to share a lot of these things. A lot of times I think we take for granted. We've been using a lot of these things and this thinking for a long, long time. And it's always amazing to me when I talk to an early career salesperson where they'll look at some of the simplest things we've developed and say, wow, that is super helpful for us. And so Mike and I decided that one of the things we're going to do is as we expand our website a little bit, is to create sort of a repository of tools that anybody's welcome to grab from us. And we just want to make that available to people that are struggling with things that, maybe we just don't think are that big of an issue. So by all means, as we go forward and we build this out, and it'll take us a little bit of time to really add more and more assets to that, let us know if there are things that you're struggling with. We've had a couple of requests we didn't talk about today, but things about onboarding, things about team development, and just different comp plan stuff. We had a couple of people ask us if we had templates for comp plans and how to design those. So I think as we build out that repository, it'd be great to get feedback from people to say, in our organization, if we could just find a template or some formula that we could use to build our own thing, and we're more than happy to develop that and make it available for everybody. So this will be something we'll be focused on here in the coming weeks and months.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.